You smurfed that up today. That happens. Don't worry about it. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My apologies. Don't forget to clickety clickety click, click to click to click. An amazing show actually tonight for everybody. We'll get after it right away. One of the top stories today is the Pickering Nuclear Power Plant. There's a terrible rumor. It's a terrible, terrible rumor. The aging, which is an understatement, the brittle and decrepit Pickering Canadian Nuclear Power Plant near Toronto is to get $2 billion refurbishment. $2 billion. Really? You can refurbish a nuclear plant for $2 billion. And the lies begin right away. This is Pickering Nuclear Plant, and look at somebody actually walking their pits along the shoreline, the radioactive shoreline. Right? It's shocking. Now, if you're there with a camera, they're going to come down and beat you up. Refurbishment would extend the plant's life by 30 years. These are mass genocide machines. We're going to cover the tritium that the CANDU reactors release. It's really something what I'm going to show you. It's going to extend the life by 30 years. Yeah, okay. Going to create 11,000 jobs. Really, for $2 billion. And they're going to start the preliminary work for Pickering Station this year. And the project is expected to be completed by the end of 2030s, give or take a decade. So it's going to take them 12, 14 years to refurbish it. You're like, no, they're building a new one, Dana. No, they're refurbishing it. So the Ontario Power Generation, the despicable, disgusting Ontario Power Generation, which is the government, will start preliminary work for the Pickering site, and it's going to be in 2030-ish, 2035, 2037. It's 28 miles east of Toronto, which means everybody's in perpetual radioactive fallout zone from the fuel pools. And it would create some 11,000 jobs during the construction, 6,400 jobs after it's finished. And the project needs approval from the Federal Nuclear Safety Commission. Like, if you base something up on jobs, if that's what you're going to base the whole thing up on, you are in the total wrong frame of mind. The project still needs approval from the Federal Nuclear Safety Commission. Canada's got a Nuclear Safety Commission. I know they got a bunch of scumbags, but there's no safety commission, I can tell you that much. After refurbishment, the Pickering plant is expected to produce a total of 2,000 megawatts of electricity, enough to power 2 million homes. If you take the money and spend it on geothermal, you're going to get the same power. And it'll be ready in 2 years instead of who knows when. Look at all the people that signed their name to it. They're so proud of themselves. Look at them. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people with their name on the story. Me. So let me talk about nuclear for a second. That 2013, here's the world's media. You got the biggest medias in the world right there, pretending they're in the fuel pool of Reactor 4. Now, if the truth came out and the world knew this was faked, they wouldn't be talking about Pickering or anywhere else, would they? Think about how evil you actually got to be to do something like that. And this is your media. And do you really think they won't do it again and again and again and again? This kind of criminal activities? The Pickering nuclear refurbishment is the path of least resistance for clean energy. The disease factory that has already contaminated the lakes, the biggest aquifers, freshwater aquifers in North America. This is the drinking water, and this is downtown. I mean, this is, you're talking about millions of people within a short distance of this place. The entire project could cost $10 billion. Well, that's quite the change from the story they're singing at $2 billion. According to the degenerate Canadians for Nuclear Energy. These are degenerates, right? We've covered them quite a bit over the years. One of the several groups that advocated for preserving the power plant as an operating generator. So $10 billion. So why would you put $2 billion in a headline? Because that's basically what it takes to refurbish this. In other words, they're going to steal $8 billion. So let's talk about Ford, the Ontario provincial government, for a second. But first off, we got a poll. Well, we had a poll. Just bear with me. I'll fix that. All right, let's try this again. We got a poll somewhere. Here, poll, one poll, two poll, three little polls. Is nuclear power an industry of human haters, degenerate, vicious, mass-murdering monsters? And everybody's going to have to ask themselves that question at some point. Everybody. Including the pro-nuclear community's loved ones. And there's no doubt that's what they are. Any industry that sits in silence and lets the media pretend they're in a building that don't exist, a nuclear meltdown at that, is not an industry you want on your planet. If you want to protect your children and your loved ones, you need to hold that creatures right there accountable, get right on it. So Ford's refusal to invest in renewables put the people of Ontario at risk. So get a load of this story. This is 2023. This is last year. Energy storage powered by Ontario's nuclear assets. Storage powered. And so this is where Bruce Power got $4.3 billion. $4.3 billion after canceling 750 solar and wind farms in Ontario, which were direct competition. Now, the $4.3 billion, we'll get to in a minute for you, was meant to pay for storage for 750 wind and solar farms. So, and I'll do the math for you coming up in a second. This need will also provide a historical opportunity for the region to attract more than $4 billion of investment and thousands of jobs. Being able to store clean baseload energy from nuclear. Why would you want to store energy from nuclear? So they're going to steal the majority of that. And so 750 wind and solar farms, if you divide that into 4.3 billion, because that's the number, 4.3 billion. Don't worry, we got another story coming up. Is almost $6 million for each solar and wind farm for storage. So they closed down 750 wind and solar farms in Ontario. Took the $4.3 billion that they were going to locate to the 750 wind and solar farms last year and gave it to Bruce Nuclear Power for storage, and nuclear doesn't need storage. There's not a single nuclear power plant that has a storage system because they don't need it. And they shouldn't exist in the first place. And this is the same people that hid this from you. The Canadian nuclear industry hid that from you. Not only that, the Canadian nuclear industry in Ontario are the people that removed the restrictions from Fukushima nuclear meltdown contaminated food, while 55 countries banned it in 14 prefectures for over a decade. Canada removed all restrictions, so Japan couldn't ship the radioactive food anywhere, only to, you guessed it, Canada. So let's talk about these disease factories known as tritium, as can-do reactors. Hi, everybody. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. It's a little shocking. They fed waste to all the Canadians in the supermarkets from the nuclear wasteland itself, which was banned by 55 countries and 14 prefectures. And I put together the prefectures that were banned by 55 countries for a decade, which is half the country, half of Japan. But the food that they're talking about is coming right from the nuclear wasteland, right alongside the nuclear wasteland, where there's millions of one-ton bags. Where they emit 30 million, and the media suggests there's 60 million. And so a one-ton bag in the back of a pickup truck, bumper to bumper, is 10 rows of traffic around the planet. That's 60 million, and 5 rows of traffic continuously, bumper to bumper, right around the entire planet, 5 times. Hanford, I mean, the media tells you they can fit all the nuclear waste in the swimming pool. Hanford dumped 450 billion gallons directly of stuff that's gone through a chain reaction into the soil during the Manhattan era. And there's no excuse, because this stuff is lethal for millions of years. And so that's equal to an aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet. It's equal to a wall of lethal radiation by the liter. And we're trying to take a liter of it and put it at a train station, leave it there. Everybody walks past it every day for a million years, dies that day. That kind of lethality. And you're talking about a wall of it, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet more than once. That's just one time. If you look at all the national laboratories in the United States, Los Alamos National Laboratories, for instance, all the other ones, if you look at Russia and China, India and Pakistan, and all the other countries, Canada included, Canada's actually dumped a huge amount of 45-gallon drums of nuclear waste into the Great Lakes. They have so much contempt for you that they pretend they're in a building that don't even exist to hide it from you. That's probably one of the riskiest things I've ever seen the media do. They have no way of defending it, but unless the whole world media participates in the lie and every university participates in that lie. When are we going to say enough is enough? When are we going to call them what they are? A bunch of... really, when are we going to call them what they are? They're human haters, and they're degenerate, vicious, mass-murdering monsters. And at some point, you're going to realize I'm exactly right. I just don't sugarcoat it. I don't bother sugarcoating. Why should I sugarcoat genocide and omnicide? The destruction of the biosphere. Why should I sugarcoat that? Because what's the point, right? Now let's get on with the fun. We're far from finished yet. I'm not sure if I'm doing a show tomorrow. We got a snowstorm Saturday, a snowstorm Sunday, and a snowstorm coming Monday. It just blows my mind here. I'm in for a rough time. I'm gonna have to go out and tomorrow and plow everything that I got piled up out of the way, move it out of the way because the snow is coming and it's going to be hideous. That's going to be rough on me. I had to put headlights in the car today, and I had to put oil in the oil filter in the car. I done that on my back out in the snow. I'm busted up. My arms are torn up. But I always got enough energy to kick the shit out of the nuclear industry, that's for sure. Okay, so this is shocking. This is the CANDU reactors we're going to talk about, but it's applicable to all reactors because they all produce a prolific indigenous amount of just tritium. Hazards report pollution radiation risk from the Canadian nuclear facilities. And the report on the tritium released in Canada is in two parts. Part one discusses the tritium discharges from the nuclear facilities in Canada, which are frightening. It's frightening. The amount you're going to show you, it's frightening. It makes Europe look like a bunch of good people in the nuclear industry. There's no such thing as a good nuclear. There's zero good nuclear on this planet. There's nothing good about nuclear. From nuclear facilities in Canada compares them with those from reactors in other countries. You compare the CANDU reactors' emissions to other countries, and it's horrifying. Examines the resulting tritium concentrations in drinking water, in the air, in food near the Canadian nuclear stations. And the majority of the Canadian reactors are in populated areas where there's millions of people. And the report concludes that official attitudes on tritium are unscientific and incorrect, and that the tritium hazards, which is just one of the 1,000 fission products you better start worrying about, hazardous nature should be fully acknowledged by radiation protection agencies in Canada, who are co-opted by the industry. Pregnant women and young, less than 4 years old, children and their mothers should be advised not to live near CANDU reactors. And people who live very near, within 5 kilometers of the tritium-emitting disease factories, known as nuclear power plants, should be advised not to consume the food from their beehives, their gardens, their orchards, and not to consume wild food, blackberries and mushrooms, because the tritium reduction facilities themselves release large quantities of tritium also. And Ontario has 2 massive facilities for making tritium signs, the exit signs, and their releases are horrifying, are terrifying. And I produced a 3-hour video just on the CANDU reactors last year. I went into great detail. So Bruce A, Bruce B, Darlington TRF, the Pickering A, Pickering B, Gentilly, which is closed down, and Point Leper releases 16 million. It's actually, I thought it was 14,600,000 trillion atoms a year of tritium. So, it's 16. Let's say 16 million, because I think that's a more accurate one. To the lakes. The numbers are terrifying. And so when you look at where these plants are too, it's hard to wrap your mind around it. Point Leper is a nasty disease factory. But the Great Lakes, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and Lake Huron. So the Pickering is on Lake Ontario. Drinking water for how many? 4 million plus people. Not counting the American side. So look where it is. It's situated right in the metropolitan Ajax, Whitby, Scarborough, Markham. It's terrifying what we're looking at here. So you got Lake Ridge Health and Pickering, Lake Ridge Health, Whitby. These are very, very, very close to that disease factory. They're just a couple of miles away. And there's people living all over Bay Ridge, Liverpool, Hermitage, Central, Duffin's Bay, Woodlands. My goodness. And the releases are but a trillion. You're talking about trillions. So these numbers are representative of trillions. So 170,000, it's 170,000 trillion atoms legally released because they can't contain it. So they made it legal rather than stop doing it. Darlington Nuclear Station is on Lake Ontario. So you got Darlington and Pickering on both sides of Oshawa. My goodness, what a horror. And that's a very expensive place to live. And the cancer and the heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory problems, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline problems would be massive in these cities. Bruce Power is on Lake Huron and also on Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario is the very, 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 very last lake you want to be drinking water from, folks. And that the intakes for millions of people are right by these nuclear power plants. They're right by the outflow, the releases, the underwater releases into the lakes, into the biggest aquifers in North America. The Gentilles in Quebec, and which is an extremely populated area. Now it's closed. That flows straight down into the Gulf of St. Lawrence and into the Atlantic Ocean. Dirty scumbags. And there's endless people live all the way down to St. Lawrence. It's really something. It's a major fishing area too. And they wonder why all the beluga whales are dying down there. Combined limits for, and you put HTO, it's actually tritium 3H. It's anthropogenic man-made radiation. It's nasty. And assimilation to your body, and it becomes organically bound tritium, which means you don't expel it like they're claiming you do. They always leave that out, right? So the tritium 3H in New Brunswick is 16,400,000 trillion atoms a year legally. United Kingdom releases 8 trillion. It's just, it's the industry can't exist without being evil. There's nothing they can do. So 16 million 400,000 16, oh, I had it right the first time, and divide it by 8. Is 2 million times more, because the numbers we're talking about are in the trillions. So it's 2 million times more than the 8 trillion, which is a massive amount, by the way, that Sizewell releases legally every year. In fact, if you take all of Europe reactors, it's just some of them, but if you took all of Europe reactors, they don't equal the smallest one from Canada in the releases. Canada's nuclear reactors are truly death machines. And not only that, you can't be a death machine, a genocide machine, without being an omnicide machine where you attack all species. But it gets worse. Canadian Health has had a long history of adopting soft standards on radioactive pollutants compared to other pollutants, especially for tritium. And you can't just release tritium, folks. For example, the former 1978 Guidelines for Health and Welfare Canada in 1979 formally recommended a very lax tritium limit of 40,000 becquerels per liter for drinking water, which is because they had an accident, right? And that's what Lake Ontario was. 40,000 becquerels per liter. The current Canadian federal limit for tritium in drinking water is 7,000 becquerels, which is 7 million physical atoms in a person's hot tub, for instance, of just tritium. You can't avoid it. Which is lax compared with the limits set by the European Commission and the US EPA. The current US limit is 740 becquerels a litre, based on a maximum dose to the public of 40 microsieverts a year for drinking water. But see, these are physical atoms. You can't, this is not like you're getting energy that's pulsing and hitting you from outdoors. So you got tritium out in your garden. It pulses energy. Now, tritium won't do it that far, of course, but say you got cesium or americium or neptunium or strontium or plutonium, whatever, and it's, say, 15, 20 feet away from your house. It's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second through your wall and through you and everybody else in your house. So that's how you would measure microsieverts or millisieverts, right? You would measure it from an external application. But tritium only pulses a very short distance. And so you can't get microsieverts from tritium. The tritium you're talking about is stuff that you consumed. So it's directly in your body, it's organically bound, and it's attacking everything in your body every second for the rest of your life. Your body has to respond to every single atom. So if you got 7,000 atoms from a single liter of water, your body has to attack every atom and try to turn it into a tumor. That's the low of it. But what each atom is doing is pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. So it's wrecking chromosomes and DNA and cells. And your body has to repair all of them and try to build a tumor around it. That could take 10, 20, 30, 40 years if you just got one. But if you're drinking it, consuming it, bioaccumulating it, washing in it, cooking in it, doing your laundry in it, it's like it's madness. Washing your hair in it, it's madness. And so there's endless amount of illnesses and diseases, not immune deficiencies and injuries, illnesses that'll manifest from radiation. It's not just cancer. You can't use cancer as a litany. In the United States, the state of Colorado has set a stricter limit for tritium in surface water of 18.5 becquerels a limit. Canada was up to 40,000 becquerels a limit after an accident. That, in other words, if they didn't raise the limit, then you couldn't drink, you couldn't live there, you had to move away. Everybody would have to leave. Lake Ontario and Lake Huron. So everybody in Ontario would have to move away. So they said, to hell with you. We don't care about you. We knew this was going to happen anyway. United States, California used a limit of 15 becquerels a liter based on a 1 in a million lifetime risk of a fatal cancer. So how can you base it on fatal cancer when you've got heart problems and liver problems and lung problems and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline? And by the way, when the thyroid is saturated with the stuff, and it is immediately, and despite that it's a beta, you're drinking so much of it, it's going to be saturated. You're producing radioactive hormones. The children are producing radioactive hormones. It gets in your bones immediately and forever. So your bodies are producing radioactive stem cells. It's hard to comprehend that they hate us this much. Its former 1978 guidelines, Health and Welfare Canada, formally recommended a lax tritium limit of 40,000 becquerels per litre for drinking water. So your hot tub at that number would have been 40 million atoms in your hot tub, cooking you in your hot tub with radiation. And your body sucks up water. And then you wonder why there's so many Alzheimer's and dementia and autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. Because nuclear is connected to all of that. And if you're doing studies around nuclear power plants, the first thing you should be looking at is Down syndrome and autism, Alzheimer's, dementia, heart, liver, lung, respiratory problems. Not cancer. Cancer is latent. All of these are going to show up and in mass in frightening numbers. Tritium limits in drinking water becquerels a liter. Canadians is 7,000 becquerels. US EPA is 740. European Union is 100. Recommended by the Ontario government's ACES in 1994 but not implemented was 100. And U.S. state of Colorado is 18 becquerels a liter, and U.S. state of California is 18 atoms per liter. A becquerel is a pulse of energy a second. In addition, the Canadian recommendation was, bear with me, that 7,000 becquerels per liter limit should be further divided by 5 because the limit has relied on a risk of 5 fatal cancers per million people as being acceptable, when the more acceptable risk is 1 in a million. But again, you can't suggest that cancer is the only adverse side effects from radiation poisoning, which is the most insane assertion conceivable. And why would you do that with tritium? Yes, tritium will cause cancer, absolutely 100%. But you can't say that unless someone dies, then it's okay. When there's endless heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, and the list goes on and on and on. Literally the medical textbook of illness, and your immune system is compromised because you have to defend against all these atoms in your body, which they're trying to pawn off as microsieverts and millisieverts, which is an external dose, not an internal dose. And anybody that's promoting the external dose instead of the internal dose should be in jail for the rest of their life. These are crimes against humanity. Slurp, slurp. ACES acknowledged that the Ontario Hydro would find that meeting this limit immediately was not possible without shutting down the reactors, and it therefore suggested a less strict limit of 100 becquerels a litre for a 5-year period for Ontario Hydro to prepare for the new limit. Well, first off, they've been releasing it every day for decades, and so it doesn't go away for 120 years. So every year you're adding this massive amount, and now you have reached a tipping point. And to suggest that 1 in a million cancers is the criteria, like anybody would have used that, would have known the difference what I'm telling you right now. And so imagine how evil you got to be to even suggest something like that. The provincial government deferred to Hydro's views, announced a standard of 7,000 becquerels a litre to widespread criticism by environmental groups, which are typically the controlled opposition. I'm not an environmental group, I'm a person who's honest. And I'm worried about the environment because it's a lethal dose to the environment for millions of years. The typical emissions from nuclear power plants. In addition, residual concentrations of tritium remain from atmospheric bomb tests in the 50s and 60s, and that the resulting background tritium level in Lake Superior, which had no nuclear facilities back then, was 2 becquerels a litre in 1997. The total in worldwide in all the oceans and lakes was considered 1,100 kilograms of tritium pre-nuclear age. Within the first 10 years of it, they had multiplied it by 65,000 or something. And it never slowed down since. In 1979, a tritium groundwater concentration reached 2.15 million becquerels a litre, following a release of 666 appropriate words, terabecquerels at the Pickering disease factory. So 215 million becquerels a litre, and the population doesn't understand it, right? And so they're taking advantage of and suggesting 1 in a million cancers. These people should be shot out of a cannon at a mountain and streamed on the internet for everybody to enjoy. The amount of evil we're talking about is beyond comprehension. It's just, well, take everybody out of jail and fill it up with the pro-nuclear community, because these are monsters. They're cowards too, because they won't do it with their own hands. But they promote it by hiding the facts. The ultimate in evil, the ultimate in scumbags. And like, you know, I typed out the poll and I was like, oh God, here we go again. But, you know, I said to myself, well, that's what they are. We can prove it. They can't win. And in fact-based evidence, they can't beat me. Because I'm honest. And honesty, I don't have to remember lies. I don't have to remember propaganda. I don't have to remember fake charts. I don't have to remember fake statistics. I'm just honest. I just tell the truth. It's still brutally hard to do because it's so complicated. But it makes sense. The truth starts to make sense right away. Is nuclear power an industry of human haters? That's unassailable. That's uncontestable. And degenerate, vicious, mass-murdering scumbag monsters. We quantify that every single day, all day long. And what we do, we cover it 5 days a week typically. This was a good month. We got 22 shows in this month. It's really good. That's pretty darn good. That's why my back's hurting. But these are degenerate, vicious, mass-murdering scumbag monsters. Because that's the right thing to say. That's the right terminology. There's no polite way to say this. So call it what it is. And I'm on YouTube, so I got to be careful what I say. So I can't really tell it the way it should be said on top of that. It's so important. It's so important to tell the truth. Combined limits for liquid and vapor, terabecquerels, a trillion becquerels, so 16.4 million trillion becquerels legally. You know why Sizewell is only legally allowed to release 8 trillion? Because that's even insane. Even France, which is notorious degenerate, nuclear industry is degenerate, is the only way to explain it, is 1,800 trillion atoms, which is still a horrifying number. But the Canadian reactors, my God, these are genocide machines. Each one of them are a genocide machine on their own. It poisoned everything and everybody. Every insect, every bird, every mammal, every animal, every human in Canada has been poisoned for 45, 50 years. And now they shipped in all the food from the nuclear wasteland when nobody else would touch it for a decade. They fill the supermarkets up. Now the supermarkets are all filled up here in Canada for the last 30 years with GMO. Thanks to the nuclear industry's control on our universities and our medias. No dissenting voices are allowed. So an annual intake of tritium for those living very close to a nuclear facility who eat the product from a highly contaminated garden or breathe the air or drink the local water, really, are getting 1 million atoms a year. If it's unsafe for pregnant women and children, it's unsafe for everybody else and all the species. It is usually agreed that an annual risk of about 1 in a million of dying from cancer from radiation exposure acceptable. Go out and ask the women or the families that have children with autism or family members with dementia or Down syndrome. Ask them is 1 in a million acceptable? Because when you look at what causes all of these diseases, when you look at the cancer epidemic, right, that's in the 70s, but right at the same time was heart problems, liver problems epidemic, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Down syndrome, autism, dementia, epidemics at the same time. And so for this entire legacy, 80 years of nuclear, the only thing that they would acknowledge, even closely, barely, was cancers. And they would fight to the death over any statistics about that. To keep you divided, to keep you from understanding the true depravity of this industry. This means that 730 liters per year at 100 becquerels per liter equals 73,000 becquerels per year. And this limit is for the total of tritium intake for a year. And no more man-made radiation would be allowed. Otherwise, the maximum risk would be exceeded. And again, the risk is based on 1 in a million cancers. How can you quantify that type of assertion? Well, you control the media, you control the university. When you finally got dominance, there's no dissenting voices allowed. You can say whatever you want. And listen, there is no safe limit of anthropogenic man-made radiation. There is no safe limits. And applying this suggests the maximum to table 8.5, that most people living within 5 to 10 kilometers of a CANDU station would have around 1 million atoms each year in their body. And it's organically bound. So you're not going to excrete it like the scum, degenerate, pro-nuclear community might suggest. It's organically bound. It's assimilated into your DNA. Right? It's right into your cells. Those living very near 1 to 2 kilometers would have 10 to 20 times that amount. And this does not take into account the intakes which would occur simultaneously, the organic bound tritium intakes which occur simultaneously. And so you can't just, the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation from each of these reactors. Once you take the reactor core out and you put it in the pool, it's still splitting the atoms. There's no containment. Each fuel pool is boiling off about 120,000 liters a day. That's airborne. That's released through the tall, skinny stacks on site. That's airborne. And that's why the majority of nuclear power plants worldwide are surrounded by farms. Canada's a little bit eviler. They put it right in the cities and right in the freshwater drinking supply. So where they pump it out into the Great Lakes, right alongside of it is the intake for Toronto. It's so evil. Like, this was engineered that way on purpose. The nuclear industry, when they built these things, engineered it to have the most effective way of poisoning everybody. And then they all bought shares in pharmaceutical companies. It's unbelievable that this was able to happen. It can only happen by co-opting the media and co-opting your universities and key positions in your government. And they done that immediately through the Secrecy Act during the Manhattan Project. And they had tens of thousands of spies spying on the scientists, and then they had tens of thousands of spies spying on the spies that are spying on the scientists. And they still have them today. They never went away. It's classified, and so the average person has no concept this actually exists. And you can imagine, like, someone like me, I got a huge target on my forehead. They got no one to pick on. They got no resistance. There is no resistance to the nuclear industry. There's resistance you see out there, like Arnie Gunners and Helen Caldicott. They're complete controlled opposition. They're unbelievably controlled opposition. Their job is to lull you into complacency, and they'll give you some nice little tidbits, and then they'll stab you in the back 50 times a day. Let me give you an example of that, by the way. Listen to Arnie Gunnarsson. Let me find a clip of Arnie Gunnarsson and Helen Caldicott, because it really tells the story of how sadistic these people actually are. And I've spent so many years compiling this information, and I only put together the unassailable stuff, the most wicked of the wicked. So you can learn the story. Helen Caldicott blows me away how evil she actually is. I'm going to play these clips. I'm going to give an explanation. These are very tiny clips. And I'm going to adjust the volume in real time for you. So this one is Ernie Gunnarsson. Now, you see Fear Winds. I put that video in the fuel pool of Reactor 4. Ernie used to make the assemblies, or the racks for the fuel pool reactor core assemblies in the United States, where there's 70 of these same identical reactors. And so he knows where the fuel pool is too, but listen to what he tells you.
The Unit 4 was damaged twice. It was damaged by all of the earthquakes that occurred, and it was also damaged by a series of explosions over the first week or two of the accident. So the building is structurally weakened. Now, Tokyo Electric's acknowledged that. They went in May and June of last year. This is more than a year ago, and put an enormous number of extra structural supports directly under the fuel pool.
Fuel pools are at the top of 190-foot buildings with the reactor cores. That's Reactor 4 over there is just a stump left. There is no fuel pools. He made the racks for the assemblies for the fuel pools at the top of the buildings that have 4 decades, around 10 reactor cores stored there. And he's saying they went into a meltdown, hung out for months, putting an enormous amount of supports under the fuel pool. I'll play that part again.
And put an enormous number of extra structural supports directly under the fuel pool to keep the bottom of the pool from breaking through.
Okay, so here's Helen Callicott next. She's going to talk about Reactor 3 fuel pools.
And especially Building 3 is very fragile. It's still got a huge cooling pool on its roof, protected by nothing. The molten core has melted its way down onto the concrete of the containment vessel, but maybe into the earth. And if that collapsed, there would be a nuclear inferno.
So there's Reactor 3. This is original footage, by the way. And every academic on the planet, and she's done this interview hundreds of times and told that same lie. Reactor 3 is long gone. And the fuel pools. It's completely gone. It was ejected straight up into the sky. In the videos of the ejection, you can see the reactor core and the fuel pools falling back down to Earth. The stump that's left is clearly gone. Here's another from Ernie Gunnarsson. So Ernie is trying to convince you the picture looks like that over there, the reactors, instead of what it actually looks like.
Now, I built the
Sorry, I'll just turn it down a bunch.
Now, I built the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima. And
Unit 4 has always been my biggest concern. If you watched our website, on the very first week of the accident, I was saying that if Unit 4 were to catch fire, you'd have to evacuate Tokyo.
Does it look like it caught fire to anybody? Like, there's nothing left. The buildings were 19 stories, 65 meters, 190 feet tall buildings. This is Helen Callicott was asked, does the building look like this, Reactor 4, or does it look like that? And, of course, she's going to tell you it looks like that. The Japanese are very, very tidy people. So let's play that.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
So what you see Helen Callicott and Ernie Gunnarsson doing, these are are terrorists. They meet all the criteria for terrorism. They're not scoundrels and pirates and heels or charlatans. They're terrorists. Just like the CANDO reactors in Canada, these are terrorists. These are gangsters. These are bioterrorists, basically. These are... They should be in jail. These are miscreants. They're malfeasant. They're hateful, detestable, abhorrent, repulsive, odious, repugnant, disgusting, revolting, sickening, nauseating, parasitic scum. There's no other way to describe them, right? And let's go back to the tritium. An obvious question is, can we see any adverse health effects at locations with high tritium concentrations? Because you're only looking for 1 in a million cancers, fatal cancers. This is absurdness. It's just like imagine in your automobiles that unless you I wouldn't even know. I don't know how else to describe it, really. So imagine in a car accident, unless you don't have a seatbelt on, well, then you're considered dying of a car accident. But if you had your seatbelt on, you died. Well, you didn't die of a car accident because you had a seatbelt on. You were protected, right? So something else happened. You must have had a heart attack or a brain aneurysm or something. But you didn't die of a car accident because you had your seatbelt on, Dana. So only 1 in a million don't have their seatbelt on. So they died in a car accident, but everybody else that died in a car accident that had a seatbelt on didn't die from the car accident. They died because of some underlying health problem. So the insurance is not going to pay the family anything because they had their seatbelt on. They done what they were supposed to do. That's the equivalent to saying that you'll only 1 in a million people dies from tritium, and that's the qualifications of poisoning. By the way, the anthropogenic man-made tritium 3H, this is man-made, the tritium 3H. So you can't call the stuff in the reactors tritium. It's tritium 3H. It's a bioweapon, right? Radiation health effects are notoriously difficult to pick up because cancers are caused by radiation, are not different from naturally occurring cancers. The cancer epidemic started during the global weapons fallout peak testing, which was a nuclear war. It's the same bombs, the same radioactive fallout, except you've done it to yourselves. And there are many such cases. And, if you look at the Marshall Islands was equal to the nuclear testing there was equal to Nagasaki bomb every day for 12 years. The French Polynesians, what the French done to them, was equal to a Nagasaki, which is a plutonium bombs. The Hiroshima, the Nagasaki bomb was equal to a nuclear weapon in French Polynesian Islands every week for 12 years. Radiation health effects are notoriously difficult to pick up because the cancers are caused by radiation, not different from naturally occurring cancer. And so to suggest that only cancer, this is vile, this is horrible, these are crooks, right? These are despicable, reprehensible, damnable, hideous. There are many such cancer cases. Indeed, in the UK, about 25% of all deaths are from cancer. After Chernobyl, it closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and United Kingdom. They closed 9,400 farms for decades. And 400 are still closed today, almost 38 years later. Imagine closing 9,400 farms from radioactive fallout from 3,000 kilometers away. So, like, radiation doesn't, what I'm trying to say to you, radiation doesn't just go looking for farms. It contaminates all your drinking water immediately. At the same time, it contaminated 9,400 farms. It contaminated the air. The air doses would have been sustained for decades. And so a lot of people are dying from other diseases from radiation long before the cancer manifests or is diagnosed. Heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, and the list goes on and on and on from radiation. So when I say this is a scumbag, degenerate, monstrous industry, these are shocking. It's scandalous. It's deplorable. It's contemptible. This requires us to look for small increases in cancer rates among exposed populations which already suffer many cancers. But cancer is just one of the many, many, many diseases and illnesses and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries that'll manifest. It's not just cancer. This is how they manipulated and deceived and coerced. The tritium levels in Lake Ontario is also increasing each year, mainly due to CANDU discharges, and to which is tritium-3H. Why don't they ever use those words? Because tritium and tritium-3H are totally different. One is anthropogenic, one is created naturally through the interaction with the upper atmosphere. And to major tritium leaks in the past years. Tritium concentrations in drinking water, and the author of this study is well aware of what I'm telling you, by the way, and has chose to ignore everything else. Tritium concentrations in drinking water, in the air, and in vegetables and food near the CANDU stations are significantly increased through the bioaccumulation. They're releasing it all year, every year, at terrifying numbers. These are terrifying numbers we're talking about. And now they're going to open up the Pickering. Like, reality of it is you can build a new Pickering station, new reactors, for $10 million. $10 billion, rather. So they're going to refurbish the Pickering station, which is the biggest scandal in human history. Right after Fukushima, they located money for Bruce and the other nuclear power plants to so-called refurbish them. Then they hired the average blue-collar worker to go into the nuclear wasteland and do the welding, the cutting, and everything else because they're temporary workers. And so their diseases might not show up for a decade, but they're going to get them 100% for sure. All significantly increased near the CANDU stations. These are not stations, these are disease factories. These results in turn in high tritium intakes in residents within 5 to 10 kilometers of the CANDU nuclear reactors, and very high tritium annual intake, 3H intake, in residents who live within 1 to 2 kilometers. So pregnant women and young, less than 4 years old, children and their mothers should be advised not to live near tritium emitting facilities within 10 kilometers, which means everybody else should move away too. And I'm not kidding you, everybody should move away. You should move at least 100 kilometers away. And people who live very near 5 kilometers of tritium 3H emitting facilities should be advised not to consume food from their own garden or breathe the air or drink the water or leave their house. When you can't stay there, it's a nuclear wasteland. And its bioaccumulation every year is frightening numbers. These are frightening numbers. The most terrifying numbers. These are just horrifying numbers. I wouldn't visit these places now that I know this stuff. And not to consume the wild food, blackberries and mushrooms grown there. Look, to suggest that being close to it is completely dishonest. Anybody within 100 kilometers of these massive emitters, these are massive. These are unlike anything else on the entire planet. The CANDU reactors are true genocide machines. And because tritium-3H reduction facilities themselves, and they have signage facilities that release, as the numbers I've covered it. If you go back to my CANDU reactor video last year, on tritium, which is a 3-hour friggin' video, 3-hour presentation on tritium. And I cover those signages with the documentation. It's horrifying. And sitting in silence is not an option. Because tritium reduction facilities themselves release large quantities of tritium. Nuclear reactor operators should be requested to examine the option for long-term storage. You can't store it. See, the problem with tritium 3H is you can't store it. It just bleeds right from the tanks itself, from the pipes and everything else. This is why they're releasing so much in the first place. They can't contain it. You can't contain it. And now they want to use tritium for fusion reactors. And so you're looking at around 35,000 US per gram, because it's that hard to contain. See? For moderator circuits in the decay tanks, it's decay tanks. It takes 120 years to decay. As a way of reducing the tritium discharges. The only way to reduce it is to turn these things off and move Canada somewhere else for 120 years. Operators of the tritium disease factory facilities should give further consideration to other ways and means of reducing the tritium release. You can't mitigate it. Ontario is supporting a plan to refurbish the Pickering. Ontario is not supporting the plan. The nuclear industry is. And Ontario has been captured by the nuclear industry. Ontario is a prisoner to the nuclear industry. Pickering would supply reliable, low-cost, emission-free. Well, all nuclear power plants need 2 gas, oil, and coal plants. Dedicate them for their entire life cycle. To build it, to run it, and to decommission it. Over 100 years. You need dedicated gas, 2 gas, oil, and coal large, industrial large, gas, oil, and coal power plants. And they're hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. They can't contain the tritium. The tritium hemorrhages from all the pipes, all the tanks, everything. This is why there's such... Like the numbers are... It unequivocally should be totally illegal to build a CANDU reactor. 100% should be illegal to run a CANDU reactor. These are the worst things can happen to a country. Just one of these in the country is guaranteed in increments to destroy your country. It's guaranteed to make everybody in the country sick. Not maybe, but guaranteed. Every species, every insect, every bird, every animal, every mammal. Pickering would supply reliable, low-cost, emission-free power for an additional 30 years. Well, see, the problem with these reactors, the reason you close them down at around 30 to 40 years, the original charters were for 30 years, is because they're high-pressure reactors, 1,000 plus PSI, and the reactor containment becomes brittle after 20 years. And so they slowly start to scale. They're supposed to slowly scale back the power output in increments towards the closing time. But because the industry is now so prolific, has taken over your universities, taken over your media, has taken over key positions in your government, they're truly the most lethal thing to humanity in the 8 million species. Pickering would supply reliable, low-cost, emission-free power for an additional 30 years, suggesting it's low-cost and reliable. Like, first off, if they try to do this for $10 billion, they still can't do it. They're still going to have to rob you for endless. They're going to have to jack the price through the ceilings to compensate for the money they're robbing from you. The Pickering nuclear refurbishment is the path of least resistance for clean energy. Can you imagine what kind of degenerate monster you got to be to write something like that? Can you imagine what, like, John Mitchell McGarth, can you imagine what kind of despicable creature he actually is in real life? These are perpetual disease factories on a scale that no other reactor on the planet can come close to. The CANDU reactors are a curse on humanity. They're a plague on humanity. And they'll plague humanity for millions of years, their emissions. These are truly diabolical. The government has simply approved $2 billion for advanced work that needs to be done before a decision can be made. So they're going to burn $2 billion on it before they can make a decision. You got any idea how so batshit, kooky, lunatic that statement actually is? I've never heard of a statement like this before. It does show you a total co-opt of your universities and your medias. A total co-opt. And your government. Veterans and people are living on the street because they can't get any help whatsoever, and they're going to throw money at these disease factories. Healthcare can't keep up with the diseases they already created, and they're going to create more. Ultimately, history will show that the destruction of Canada, the downfall of Canada, is attributed directly to the emissions from the CANDU reactors. The entire project could cost $10 billion. According to the Canadian for Nuclear Energy, we've covered I don't know how many times. These are disgusting parasites. These are cowards. One of several groups that advocate for preserving the power plant as an operating generator. One of several groups. There's quite a lot of these disgusting parasites, right? The entire project could cost $10 billion. So if you took $10 billion and you divide it by $5 million, which is a megawatt of geothermal energy, that's the exact same amount of energy, but you can have it up and running in 2 or 3 years. Instead of 10 years and poison the entire planet for 1 million years. Yeah, you're not going to create 6,400 jobs that'll poison humanity for 1 million years. Thank goodness. The nuclear industry, and then they'll weaponize these people that are working in the nuclear industry against me and you. And their friends, their families will attack you. Oh, well, my loved one works for nuclear. They're good people. You can't say that. Canadian for Nuclear Energy. Look, they got the Canadian flag with the atomic symbol on it. The Canadian flag with an atomic symbol. The Canadian maple leaf, which is basically the Canadian flag. Think about how low life you got to be to do that routine. Really, think about what kind of degenerate. Something, man. These are rogue, good for nothing. Medical, they show you a cancer victim, that's where you can trace most of the cancer directly to the nuclear industry. There is, if I've done entire presentations on what happens to you with radiation treatment in your hospitals, it's terrifying. These are genocide machines every step of the way. And then they murder you in your hospitals with their radiation therapy. That's murder in the hospitals, what they're doing. Well, it's worse than that. It's genocide, isn't it? Would you like to see an example of it? Hang on, I'll show you an example. Because it's hard to wrap your mind around what they're doing to these children. The children don't know better. Children will smile no matter how sick they are. Just get a load of this. Let me show it to you. Give me a second. I'll hunt it down. There we go. So I want you to think about radiation injuries. So you go in the hospital, doctor says you got cancer, and doctor says, well, nothing we can do for you. I said, please, doctor, that's my child, that's my loved one, that's my friend, that's me. You must be able to do something. Is there anything you can do? Well, we can give them radiation therapy. Introduction and the radiation injuries from their so-called radiation therapy. Get a load of this. Don't turn away from it. Introduction to radiation injury, another silent epidemic. Silent epidemic. Radiation-induced injuries to your eyes. You go get radiation therapy, now it wrecks everything else in your body. That's how you got to look at this. Radiation injury to your heart. Radiation injuries to your kidneys. Radiation injuries, hypoxia. A nasty chronic radiation injury from hypoxia. Blood spinal cord barrier disruption, central nervous system radiation injuries. Radiation-induced lung injuries. Radiation-induced bowel injuries. Laser treatment of severe radiation injuries of the lower gastrointestinal tracts. Radiation-induced kidney injuries. Radiation-induced or breast cancer, breast radiation injury litigation. So you go in to get radiation treatment for a tumor here or there or anywhere else, and over the rest of your life you get all these disgusting lethal injuries, and then it's called torture. What they're doing to you then, that's torture, because you got to keep going back and they treat you with more radiation, which creates even more of these macabre illnesses and diseases. Injuries to the cranial nerves following proton beam radiation therapy. It's one of the most lethal things you can do to a person. I don't know why you call them hospitals when they're doing this to you. Radiation injury to the head and neck. Radiation-induced brain injuries. Radiation-induced lung injuries. Small bowels radiation injuries. Radiation-related breast injuries, 95 of them in the study. Radiation-induced intestinal syndrome. Vitamin C uptake may save lives after radiation injury, I think is the best way to put it, not accidents. But yeah, during accidents, it'll save lives, but you're still going to get sick and die from all the other diseases and illness and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. Radiation-induced brain necrosis. And I got testimonies given in front of Senates and Congress and Diets of people talking about how their loved ones were brutalized by this radiation. Radiation-induced normal tissue injuries. Radiotherapy is associated with a broad spectrum of early and late normal tissue injuries. Random nature of radiation-induced cells. Radiation-induced rectal injuries. Spinal cord. And these comes in groups. You go in and get a tumor. Yeah, they got the tumor. Now I got all these other friggin' issues that are destroying my life. I have to liquidate my assets to save my loved ones or my child or myself. Radiation injuries to the aorta and the branch arteries for your hearts. Patients with radiation-induced bowel injuries. Radiation injury to the central nervous system. Radiation rectal injuries. Radiation lung injuries. Anybody seen a pattern? Acute injuries of your glands during radiation therapy. Radiation-induced liver diseases. Radiation-induced bile duct injuries. Experimental study on acute brain radiation injuries. Well, they got tons of victims to do the studies on, don't they? Radiation-induced brain injuries. Radiation-induced brain injuries. Radiation-induced brain injuries. Radiation-induced brain injuries. Modification radiation-induced brain injuries. You seen a pattern? Anybody seen a pattern? Brainstem injuries after intensity modulated radiation therapy. Radiation, and what do you call it radiation therapy when it has all these attributes? Language decline after brain radiation therapy. Like people's jawbone starts to break down 5, 6, 7 years later with this proton beams. Radiation-induced brain injuries after radiosurgery of the brains. Recurrent brain tumors from radiation injuries. Studies on radiation-induced brain injuries after radiotherapy. Calling it radiotherapy, right, is like, it's such a sick, it's like, it's the equivalent of saying rape is a therapy for the rapist, as it is to say radiation injuries are a therapy to the doctors. Clinical approaches to reduce brain radiation injuries. Radiation-induced brain injuries. Brain tumor progression from radiation injuries after cranial irradiation. Ionizing radiation-induced brain injuries, radiation-induced brain injuries, radiation-induced normal brain injuries, because it's normal to get brain injuries from radiation. It's normal. All right, normal. Yeah, I will treat that too. We got more radiation, and we got more tricks up our sleeve yet. And you're good for, here in Canada, they'll spend $900,000 on radioactive chemotherapy. They'll steal your child, bring him to the hospital under lock and key and guards with guns, and radiate the child until the child is dying, and then they'll send him home to die in your arms. Test batteries for the assessment of radiation-induced brain injury. Is there anything else out on the entire planet that comes close to this fucking disaster? To this despicable, monstrous industry? This is monstrous. Like, this is monstrous. This is unspeakable. This is sordid and loathsome and bad and immoral and nefarious and indefensible, inexcusable. It's unforgivable. It's intolerable. It's embarrassing. It's humiliating that they're still doing it to us. It's degrading. It's hateful. It's criminal. It's egregious. Sorry, I crack up sometimes. I can't help it. Microwave-induced brain injuries. Anybody getting a picture, a big picture? Injury to the brain from radiation therapy. How can you call it therapy? You sick and sadistic criminals. How does that work? Brain radionecrosis after adjuvant radiation therapy. Oh, it's therapy, Dana. If I take nails and stick it through your leg and call it therapy, is it really therapy? If I destroy your life, is that therapy? Because the humans somehow have accepted being slaughtered with no success. Let me show you some of that. We'll jump back in. You know, all the studies on all the animals died from radiation exposures. Every animal. But the industry is like, there's no evidence to suggest that there's any harm. Well, if you go to the hospital and you look at it, the whole story is sordid, isn't it? So 3% efficiency of chemotherapy treatment and cancer cures. 3% efficiency. And do you know what the rate for misdiagnosis is? 3%. So 3% efficiency of chemotherapy treatment on cancer is they done kind of okay because they didn't have cancer in the first place. Conclusion based on facts collected by worldwide research published in 2004 and on their abstract. Now this was repeated, right? Let me go back to that. The study was repeated. So the original conclusion was based on facts in 1985 and it was validation of these conclusions in 2004. So they repeated the studies in 2004. And that the survival rate estimated to be 2.3% in Australia and 2.1% in the United States for 5 years. Like, would you drive your car if you had a 2.1% chance of surviving? And let me go backwards again. Let me do the dog studies right here. Let me show what the dog studies showed. and why what I'm going to show you after is so important. Because I'm horrified that Canada, instead of using geothermal, something sensible, is going to reignite a nuclear disease factory in Canada. This is mind-blowing in my books. Okay. So, toxicity of inhaled plutonium dioxide in beagle dogs and beagle puppies. 144 beagle dogs and beagle puppies. And that they all died from 3 tumors. All of them. So tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occurred beginning about 3 years after exposure. But the death started from 1.5 to 5.4 years after exposures. Bone tumors found in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. Bone tumors. Which means you're mutating your stem cells too, see? Lung tumors in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death because the plutonium burns a hole through your lung, ends up in your bones anyway. And liver tumors from trying to filter it out in dogs were found in 20 dogs, but the cause of death in only 2 dogs occurred later than the tumors in the bones and the lungs. So you had tumors in 3 of these in your bones, your lung, and your liver, each individual animal, from single inhalation exposure. So the findings in dogs suggest a similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to plutonium-238. Okay. But it was discovered that human kidneys are at least 50 times less efficient than an animal kidney at removing plutonium, which meant that the humans are 50 times more vulnerable than the dogs, and the dogs all died from multiple tumors. And the humans are 50 times more vulnerable. But the biggest byproduct, curium isotopes are the major byproduct in irradiated nuclear fuel rods. Period. Not iodine, not cesium, not tritium. And this is why we call them curium isotopes, curium meltdowns, for instance. And curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for the plutonium isotope. And so the CANDU reactors, their biggest byproduct emitted into the communities and the cities where they're stationed is the most insidious thing conceivable. They would put these things in the community, and they know everything I'm showing you. And then when you get sick and you got to go to the hospital, then they irradiate you until you're dead. And there's only 3% survival rate. But there's also the radioactive material and radiochemotherapy, which is chemicals. If I give you chemicals, it's murder. If they give it to you, it's therapy. Late radiation rectal injury. You're all cured, go on home. 6 months later, doctor, I'm having a few problems. It's pretty personal. Oh, it's just late radiation rectal injury. Come on in, we'll give you some proton beams. You'll be okay. Surgical treatment of chest wall radiation-induced injuries. Radiation-induced injuries. Radiation injury from radiation experiments. These are all experimental. In order to get this experimental done to you, the doctor will say, you got to sign a piece of paper that you can't sue me. Your family can't sue me. And then they'll radiate you until you die. Have a nice day. Next. Radiation-induced skin necrosis. The death of most of all of the cells in the organ or tissue. This is their solution. Instead of making you healthy, they make you as unhealthy as possible. If you survive, congratulations. You're one of the 2.1% that survived. Way to go. We're going to study you. You're special. You shouldn't have survived at all. We can't have that. You need more radiation therapy. What you need, come on down. We're going to pay for it. Bring your kiddies down. We'll get them too. They'll steal your kid to give them radiation therapy. It's law in Canada. You've got to give the child radiation therapy if they got cancer. If you're an adult, you can say no. But if you're a child, you can't say no. You can get a sex change, but you can't say no to radiation therapy if you're a child. Because when you let evil run rampant for this long, there's no limit now. They're so evil. It's natural. This is natural. My mom and pa was evil scumbags. Their mom and pa were evil monsters. His great-great-grandpappy was an evil fucking monster. Radiation-induced death. I think that says it all, don't it? That tells the story. Please, doctor, murder my child. He's got cancer. He lives right by Pickering. It's beautiful there. Brain radionecrosis after adjuvant radiation therapy. Radiation-induced lung injuries. Late radiation injuries after post-operative radiotherapy on breast cancer patients who got it from radiation exposures from their supermarkets and their farms, because almost all nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. Total coincidence, I'm sure. What Canada done to us. Canada removed all restriction on the food from the nuclear wasteland in 93 days. In July the 13th, was it? Quite a coincidence, by the way. They don't hate you, they just love to kill you. There's a difference, Dana. It's not really hate. They love you. They just love to kill you. It's a different type of love. It's a love only the nuclear industry can have. See, my problem is I cure. And that makes me a monster, because, I cure, right? I actually cure. And I just can't sit in silence. Hang on. You got to see this to believe it. So when you talk about potassium, for instance, and they equate bananas, potato chips, and stuff like that with releases from nuclear power plants. So cesium-137 has 88 curies, which is 37 billion atoms per gram. There's 140 grams in strontium curies per gram in strontium-90. So the effects of cesium-137 are about 10 million times more radioactive than potassium-40. And that 104 curies per square mile of cesium contaminations is what makes the Chernobyl exclusion zone uninhabitable. And the numbers where they're growing food in the nuclear wastelands, surrounded by nuclear wastelands that were banned by 55 countries for over a decade, except for Canada, which is not really a country, is it? Because they removed all the restrictions after 93 days, and Japan is growing around 8 billion pounds of food, and so they couldn't ship it anywhere under Canada, and that's why everybody's too sick to resist. So what's really interesting is they have all these studies knowing that food just is an absolute magnet for radiation. So why is almost every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms, as far as you can see? And child's risk of cancer from radiation 10 to 100 times higher than an adult with the same exposure. It's way worse than that. It's infinitely worse than that. It's 1,000 to 10,000 times worse. Low doses of radiation doesn't just cause cancer, heart diseases and strokes, lung problems, respiratory problems. That's one of the reasons you'll never catch me buying sunflower oil. In Canada, it's all GMO, by the way. And so this is a plume from Fukushima based on 468 hours, 19.5 days. This model right here. Over there is only 324 hours. But Fukushima radioactive fallout is global warming. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because I simulated snowfall. And think about all of the snow. Think of this as a snowstorm. So it starts up there in Japan. And after 19 days, you got a snowstorm covering most of the planet. By day 30, you have a snowstorm that you can't see covering the entire planet. But think of it as a snowstorm. And think of each flake as an isotope, as an atom with gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas. And so it never goes away. You can't burn it. You can't incinerate it. You can only liberate it back into the environment. But think of the invisible snowstorm where every snowflake is a gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas. And each of them are pulsing energy almost at the speed of light. 10, 20, 30 feet. And when they hit each other, they don't mingle. They hit each other, they slam into each other almost at the speed of light, almost the speed of light, almost the speed of light, and they bounce off each other. That effect, by the way, is known as an X-ray. And so your forest and your communities, you're looking at full body X-rays. And so for the insects, which are reproduced rapidly, then their sterilization is very evident. And so most of the little birds you're seeing in the last number of years are seed eaters, because the insect eaters have mostly died out. Yeah, there's some still left, obviously, but the majority, when you go into the forest now, they're silent. On both sides of Canada, we've done the research. And the research is terrifying that we've done. It's terrifying. We've done the Pacific Ocean for 6 years, 4 to 5 to 6 months a year each year, without coming home, without coming off the ocean, and the species are totally wiped out. I showed at the beginning of my video last night, by the way, and if you're not familiar with it, you can go watch that first part, and you'll see the before and after footage and some of the research expeditions, and I can guarantee you, and I provide GPSs of all my research is up at thenuclearproctologist.org. And you can call in right now if you want to. It's 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. And think about radiation health specialists. Children over 11 becquerels a kilogram of cesium start to see heart problems. So you can put 200 million of these. Think of a becquerel as an atom that pulses energy every second, and that energy is described as a becquerel. Think of 200 million atoms on the head of a needle you can't see with your bare eyes. So think how easy it is, because you can't perceive it, you can't smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up or throw rocks at it or perceive it. So you have no concept that it exists, right? And then Geiger counter can barely pick up the gammas. It won't pick up anything else. Children over 11 becquerels a kilogram of cesium start to see heart problems. So how are you going to understand 11 becquerels a kilogram when you can't perceive that whatsoever? It's such a tiny amount. Because you put 200 million atoms in a head of a needle, you can't see it. How are you going to recognize 11? How are you going to protect your loved ones, your children, the elderly, your communities, the species from something like that? And then if that's that tiny, such an insignificant amount in any other standards is so deadly, imagine what that insignificant amount is going to do to the birds and the insects, which are very tiny, very extremely vulnerable. And so you're going to compromise. This has compromised all the water. We have tacked the water, the most important asset we have on the entire planet. We can't exist without it with life. We should worship water. You can't exist without water. And we treat it like it's an enemy many times. We try to kill it every step of the way. Nuclear industry took it to a whole different level. They killed it. They destroyed the essence of water. And if you look at my research expeditions, you'll understand that assertion. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? And this is a weapons facility. This is a wind scale, which is now called Sellafield. They changed the name because of the hideous crimes they committed there. With a meltdown, they're still hemorrhaging 8 million liters a day into the ocean, 2 million gallons a day into the ocean, from mixed oxide meltdown. Been going on since 1959. I tell you, 3 Mile Island is the worst nuclear accident in America. Santa Susana released 460 times more radiation into the environment and hid that from 1959 up until about 15 years ago. Like, these are disease factories. That's why they're surrounded by farms. They're disease factories. This is why they're doing that. Because the radiation gets sucked up into the food, and then they ship it out to the supermarkets, and they buy shares in pharmaceutical companies, so when they retire, they're filthy rich. Inhaling just one radioactive hot particle can cause a cancer. And every nuclear meltdown, all the emissions from the fuel pools are hot particles. Everything that's going into the farms, and they know the farms are uptaking the radiation. They got so many studies, you can barely wrap your mind around it. And 50 becquerels a kilogram in adults, and moose, and cow, and caribou, and everything else, leads to irreversible lesions in the vital organ. So what do you think it's doing to the insects and the birds and the mammals? 1,000 times more vulnerable than an adult. What do you think is happening there? It's catastrophic, right? So when you got irreversible, look up the word, if you're pro-nuclear, look up that word irreversible. And look up what lesions to your vital organs means. It means you compromise your immune system, for starters, because it's going to try to deal with the lesions in your organs for the rest of your life, which means your body is under siege with white blood cells. You call that leukemia, right? You produce more white blood cells than red blood cells, and red blood cells carry oxygen and nutrition throughout your whole body. I know what they say about me. I'm a terrible person. I'm a lawyer. I'm full of shit. I don't have any evidence. There's not a single piece of evidence to back up any of my assertions, despite the fact that that's all I do. I show you the evidence for my assertions. And I've been at this forever. It seems like forever. And it's a nightmare every night when I go to sleep, because I do these shows. I have to live with this all day. I do my show. And when the show is over, do you think I can just switch this off? Do you think that the only reason I'm here is because I can't switch off my research expeditions, let alone this stuff? It's a curse in many ways to me. And I couldn't be happier. I couldn't be prouder to do the things I'm doing. I'm absolutely thrilled to come here and go to war every single day. I'm thrilled. I'm heartbroken. I'm gutted with all the stuff I see every day. I'm gutted. And the lies infuriate me because of the harm that I know that they're going to produce. And every time I see a nuclear power plant, and usually when they show you a plant, they show you this up close, they'll go by the tree and take the picture, right? But if you can get an aerial shot down on a plant, look what you're looking at. That's what you're going to see every single time. Unless it's Pickering or Bruce, then it's going to be in the community or directly into your drinking water supply. And because they get away with it, there's no incentive not to be evil. And then all the experts they roll out for you are all the industry's controlled opposition itself. They can't roll me out there. No one's going to put Dana up on a pedestal and say, hey, get a load of this. Because that's the end of the nuclear industry. Boom, bang. It's right then, right now. If the world was to watch this presentation tonight, do you think the nuclear industry is going to be alive tomorrow morning? It's going to be on its heels fighting for another day of survival. The world will turn on them, appropriately so, immediately. And so the hope is that I create 1 million little bastards just like me that beat the shit out of the nuclear industry every day. 100 becquerels a kilogram of cesium. So what about uranium? What about plutonium? What about americium? What about curium, the biggest byproduct of the radiative fuel rod? What about the 1,000 other fission products? So Japan is only acknowledging cesium, but they're not even checking it. You can't acknowledge just cesium. If you're only going to acknowledge cesium, then you're not acknowledging 1,000 other fission products. Or the biggest byproducts of the radiative fuel rod, which is the curium isotopes, which need lead shielding 20 times thicker. This is an absolute betrayal. Every fucking step of the way is a betrayal. Every step of the way. Every time they open their mouths, their pie holes. I apologize. I'm starting to get a little cranky. It's okay. It's normal. If you're not cranky after watching all this, something wrong with you. Top radiation experts, 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. If you're eating food from this farm for a year, there's no way you're going to have a happy future. 134 cesium, 85 strontium in fruit plants. Just because that's the isotopes they choose to look for and they find it. But it's not the only isotope. Everything is in your food. They have compromised the future of humanity and the 8 million species. But we have to, at some point, deal with this. At some point, we're going to deal with it. At some point, we're going to acknowledge it. At some point, we're going to fight back. At some point, we're going to make Earth's last stand. And which is right now. This is Earth's last stand, right? It's a total coincidence that every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms unless they're in a city. And then they're farms, which is humans. Nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. Top cancer doctor. So why are they surrounded by farms as far as the eyes can see? Why is all nuclear power plant situated, which are typically, if it's not in the ocean, it's in your drinking water. If it's in your ocean, the damage it's doing to the fish is stunning. It's stunning. It's stunning what they're doing to the sea, to the fish. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram of cesium-137. So, like, they know this. They're well aware of all this. There's endless studies. They know that growing food around nuclear is an absolute best way to kill off a planet. So why are they doing it? Because that's the best way to kill off a planet. Cesium immediately damages the heart muscles. It's not very slow acting at all. It compromises your immune system immediately. It makes you more susceptible to pathogens and viruses too. Modeling of cesium-137 vertical soil transfer by a tree root system. (134) cesium in potatoes. They should be doing a study on the curium plutonium in potatoes because they're going to find that it's cheaper to look for the cesium than it is the plutonium and the curium, see? But once you find the plutonium and the curium, once you find the cesium and everything else, you can extrapolate all the other isotopes are going to be there also through a mathematical equation. It's a total coincidence that all the nuclear power plants, except for a few, are surrounded by farms. The rest of them are surrounded by humans. Like what the CANDU reactors in Canada have done. Do you really think this is an accident? You really think this is not genocide? Does anybody really believe this is not genocide? Does anybody really believe this is not mass poisoning of humanity on a scale that's incomprehensible to the average person? They could if they watch the stuff, but not on their own. They're not going to work this out on their own. And all the nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools. Every one of them are hemorrhaging it. Once you put fuel in the pool, there's no containment. They're all splitting atoms, and they're hemorrhaging radiation. Every one of them. And the more fuel you put in the pool, the more radiation they're hemorrhaging every day. And as time, like the same thing with the tritium, as the time goes by, the amounts that are bioaccumulated in the environment are incomprehensible. Then put you in a hospital and sodomize you with radiation for the rest of you till you die. Radiation injury to the growth plates, radiation-induced lung injuries, radiation pulmonary injuries, radiation injury in the intestinal, radiation therapy-induced cardiac injuries, radiation injuries to the central nervous system, radiation injury to the canine spinal cords, radiation injury to the optic nerves, radiation injury to the lower digestive tracts, radiation injury to the human kidneys, which are 50 times less efficient than an animal is at filtering it out. Radiation-induced cognitive impairments. Early radiographic changes in radiation bone injuries, radiation injuries to the nervous system, radiation-induced insufficiency fracture of the femur 18 years after radiation therapy. Like, calling this radiation therapy, anybody that calls it radiation therapy should get their teeth kicked down their fucking throat, shouldn't they? Excuse the Canadian. Sometimes I talk like a Canadian. I know, I get it. Radiation-induced insufficiency fractures of the femur 18 years after. 18 years later, your femur cracks off because you got sucked into this despicable, if you survived that long, you got sucked into this despicable, hateful, sadistic industry. This is the most sadistic industry, the most sadistic people. To keep doing this to you, to not acknowledge everything I'm showing you, and to keep doing it to everybody in the hospitals. The amount of money we spend in the hospitals on radiation is just beyond comprehension. The Canadian government will spend $900,000 on you if you decide to get radiation in the hospitals. Oh no, we'll cover that for you. Surgical treatment of radiation injuries of the colon and rectum. Microwave radiation injuries. Acute radiation-induced injuries. Microwave-induced brain injuries. Radiation-induced skin wounds. Late radiation-induced rectal injuries. That sounds like a blast. Hi, honey. How's your radiation-induced rectal injury today? Oh, I got to go in and get some proton beam radiation therapy. They'll say that'll fix it. The contempt I have for this industry, there is no limit to it. And there shouldn't be for you either. Several decades after radiation therapy. If you survived several decades after radiation therapy, you didn't have cancer in the first place. Radiation-associated cancer risk among injured children treated at different trauma centers. Oh, your skin, you need, come on over here, we'll give you some radiation therapy. Impaired wound healing after radiation therapy. Well, you're not producing any red blood cells anymore. So, when you see these groups like Canadian for Nuclear Energy, let me assure you, these are the most vile, despicable, sadistic, maniacal. And this sack of shit, Dr. Chris Kiefer, we've covered him probably 100 times just in the last 2 years alone. These are actual monsters. He knows everything I showed you. He's just a monster. Geothermal could replace all nuclear gas, oil, and coal plants. Just leave the infrastructure in place, build your geothermal, turn off your gas, oil, coal, and nuclear plant, switch on your geothermal. And geothermal can run every community. It's you only need 3 or 4 employees. So it's very simple, very cheap, very efficient. And they spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year in the nuclear industry, but they only spend maybe a couple of $100 million playing around with geothermal. And it's always about pacifying. Oh, we're looking at it. Like, the solutions already exist to drill deep enough. They won't implement them. The only thing that's holding it back, like renewables, the only thing holding it back was storage. And we have tons, like over 20 different storage solutions that are cheap, dirt cheap. And for geothermal, the ability to drill anywhere on the planet, you can drill down deep enough, and you're going to hit 1,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. And so, closed system, you're good for 50, 60, 70 years. Way more efficient, way cheaper, as simple, mindless, stupid, just to do like the basics. And so they're going to use pneumatic water pressure, 25,000 psi water jets to slice the rocks when they're drilling down deep, where the drill bits were overheated. So they come up with a new technique now where they can just use 25,000 psi water jets to slice up the rocks. Then you use high-powered pneumatic-driven hammers, and that pounds the rocks they've already split up, and then the drill bit goes straight down through that. Then you insert your pipe and you circulate your water, the same water over and over and over and over. And you can replace gas, oil, coal, and nuclear. And you could have done this 50 years ago if you wanted to. The nuclear industry has strangled you and now poisoning you every facet of your life. You eat the radioactive food, you get sick, you go to the hospital, they radiate you, you get sick and die. It's a closed-loop system to get rid of you. The official story yesterday from the International Atomic Energy Agency, is that nothing got out of these two reactors, Reactor 3 and Reactor 4 at Fukushima. So does anybody here really believe that nothing got out of the buildings that no longer exist? Now, yeah, the mainstream media came out and told you they're in a fuel pool at the top of 120 feet above that stump right there that shouldn't exist. That should have been razzed all the way to the ground. They put some kind of contraption over it, and then they claimed it looks like this on the inside. The fuel pools are at the top of the building. That's the original picture of the plutonium mixed oxide fueled reactor, number 3 in Fukushima, Japan. There wasn't a nuclear scientist on the entire planet, in Canada or anywhere else, that looked, or a professor or academics, that looked at that and said the fuel pool and the reactor core were still intact. But officially, in 2021, they got all the fuel out of the pool, which doesn't exist. It was atomized in aerosol and ionized and radiated, everything else. And that's Reactor 3 detonating right there. The plume covered the planet in about 26 days. All the models clearly agree. And I apologize because I get cranky sometimes. I get cranky because of the desperation that we're actually in. So there's Reactor 3, there's Reactor 4. So they put these contraptions over Reactor 3 and Reactor 4, and then they claim that they were in the buildings getting the fuel out of the pools from buildings that don't even exist. And all the media had done it, and every university participated in that lie. In the first year in Japan, it was 865,000 extra cancers. And cancer is just one of the many illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I guess we'll call it a night. I'm not sure if I'm doing a show tomorrow night. I'm going to try to. But I'm not sure if I'm going to get a show tomorrow night in. Is nuclear power an industry of human haters and degenerate, vicious, mass-murdering scumbag monsters? And it is. I mean, you see what I showed you tonight, there's no way to deny that this is an industry of scumbags, mass-murdering monsters. There's just no way to deny that. And so if you make it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up. And let's do a shout out tonight because this, I feel real rotten when I was putting this together today. It gets to me, right? Albert, Richard, James Lucid, of course, awesome. Vast Thinker, Blue Jay, Peaceware, I know Dana Nassan is out there. I seen Colette out there. I know Stephen Young is out there. I know Sue is out there somewhere. I know many people are just sitting back watching us saying nothing. Richard and Brian, good night everybody. Hugs for everybody. I'll play some music when I'm almost finished here. Port Angeles, because if it plays the music too early, I got a tendency to rush myself. And I feel so shitty tonight. I feel that I should, whenever I do shout out to everybody, I feel better after. It takes the edge off for me for some reason. Because the majority have been around a very long time. Like a lot of people just are sitting in the background, right? And I can't possibly thank everybody for just showing up at my show. I can't possibly articulate how much I appreciate you showing up. And I can't possibly articulate those that are capable of supporting me, how much that actually means and the difference it does make, right? I can't possibly articulate it. And the fact that this whole show couldn't exist without somebody helping me constantly. People have to help, unfortunately. I wish I was independently wealthy and could do everything myself, but I'm not. And I burn myself out constantly trying to keep this whole operation going, right? It's relentless pursuit of the moral high ground, of trying to do something good, something necessary, something that the world is lacking and that we desperately need. A lot of people that are informed. And so my idea is an educational program that informs the population and educates the population. There's no way you're going to watch one of my programs and not walk away educated. Even if you hate my guts, you're going to walk away educated. You're going to walk away going, oh shit, the nuclear industry is a bunch of degenerate scums. And so I won. And if you're pro-nuclear, you come here and you think you're going to debunk me, you're going to find some niches in the armor, you're going to end up realizing that you're a monster. You're just another useful fucking idiot. If you're pro-nuclear, you show up here, you can hate me all you want, but ultimately, you can't escape the truth. Rock, hi everybody, good night everybody. We're almost up through the names there. I'm talking instead of talking, saying hi. How often does that happen again? All the time. John Curtis. And I always read the comments after. Sometimes they're sitting there till the next morning, but I always read all the comments. Hugs for Stephen Young. And Stephen, I want you to watch The Universal Antidote. The Universal Antidote. You might not find it on YouTube, but you'll find it on the other platforms. The Universal Antidote. T-H-E in the beginning of it. The Universal Antidote. Very important that anybody with health issues watch that. It's unbelievably important. And you're banned from talking about the subjects on it, but when you see it, you'll understand. It's the best thing you can do for yourself and for your loved ones. And I desperately want Stephen Young to watch it. And I'm going up through the names again. Dana Nasana. I'm still forgetting to show people out. I'm looking at people and like nodding my head like, hi. We're almost through it. Good night, everybody. Looks like we got through all of it. Joey. I was looking for any names I haven't shouted out already. And Katja. Oh, I meant to say that earlier, and I didn't. My apologies. Let me keep looking. We're almost all the way up to. We had quite a few chats there tonight, didn't we? I can't read. I'm just looking at names right now, but I'll read after. Michael Schmidt. I think I got. Well, that's all the. I don't get all the comments on my interior. And we come back down to the most recent comments. Extra shout out for Sue. I really stepped up this month and made a huge difference. And Daryl Murray. James Lewis donated again, my God. Thank you, James. Well, unbelievable. Okay, so we made it through the show. Did we hit the 2-hour mark yet? I'm stalling for the 2-hour mark. We're just 1 minute of the way, I think, are we? I still got to stall for another minute. So let's stall for one more minute. Should ABC Cecilia Vega, CNN Ann Curran, BBC Rupert Winfield Hayes, CBS Seth Dorn, which is just a fraction of the people that pretended they were in Reactor 4, Fukushima Reactor 4 fuel pool, should the world reject them? Should they have to serve time in prison for what they've done? And should the people the producers, the editors, the videographers, the people who participated in that lie, should they lose their degrees? Should they be held accountable? Should they get death? Should they get the death sentence if they're Americans? You have the death sentence in a lot of places. Shouldn't they get the death sentence for what they done? Because what they done was they stopped you from being able to protect yourself and your children and your loved ones and your communities. And Dana Nasana, and we love Dana Nasana. Dana's been around forever. and he wears the badge. We don't need a moderator. But I think it's so appropriate that Dana Nasana is the moderator. You really won't find a nicer person than Dana Nasana over the years, and the other people. Of course, there's a long list of people that have just stepped up at the most crucial moments and done everything they can to make this operation move forward. And I haven't won every battle, let's face it. I have not won every single battle that, my health got the best of me. I was in a wheelchair for years and years, right? I still went to war. The whole story is incredible. If you know the whole story of the last 13 years alone, it's an incredible story of what we've done and what we continue to do. And look at the nuclear industry is falling apart everywhere, and the only resistance we see out there is just it's a small group of us that are educating the population and the investors and the policymakers. And I truly believe we're the reason this whole industry is falling apart, because there's never been an educational program where we supply all the evidence in history. There's never been one. And if there had been, the industry wouldn't exist today, see? And so the world might never understand that this little group of people existed, but the world and the species will benefit from our existence. I can guarantee you that. We have made the difference. And just because you don't get recognition from it doesn't mean anything. Like, there's no way we didn't destroy this industry, and we're never going to give it up. Something in the water? Did I get through everybody? Yeah, geothermal is the answer. Let's call it a night, because I'm in that mood right now where I can probably go for another 2 hours, but I know my throat can't. Hey, we're over the 2 hour mark. Have a great night, everybody. I absolutely love every one of you. Everybody have a wonderful night. And I'll be back. Hopefully I do a little show tomorrow night. But if not, I'll be back on Sunday. And think with my conscience, if I don't do a show tomorrow night, I'll probably be here on Friday. We got a snowstorm for Saturday. We got a snowstorm for Sunday. We got a snowstorm coming for Monday. Oh my goodness. Have a great night. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody on the next show. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up. And everybody give yourselves a pat on the back that got educated. Because trust me, it's the best thing you could have done. Take care, folks. We'll see everybody soon.